oldest powers feared not weapons but a human with empathy. In a universe ruled by pride and tradition, one young delegate dared to listen, and it changed everything. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a leader. But when the most dangerous strategist alive was sent to remove her, he knelt instead. This is the story of how quiet courage shook the stars. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's move to this wonderful story. The stellar assembly of Concord had always prided itself on balance, decorum, and the illusion of control. It was a place where 19 advanced species gathered to talk, argue, and pretend they all agreed on something. Floating high above the gas giant Veltraxis, the assembly's chamber shimmered with polished metal, glowing glass panels, and light that adjusted to each delegate's preferred climate and atmosphere. It was supposed to be a symbol of unity, but lately cracks had begun to show. Cracks caused by a newcomer who didn't seem to follow the unspoken rules. Draven Nulo of the Orenthians sat in his carved coral seat, his long tendrils twitching with frustration. As High Overseer of the Resource Accords, he had dealt with tricky negotiations, shady trade alliances, and even the occasional smuggler's revolt. But nothing had unsettled him more than the rise of one single human representative. She was young by galactic standards, barely into her third decade, and yet she had already formed partnerships that took others centuries to develop. He couldn't understand how someone from a planet that only recently discovered faster-than-light travel was now guiding discussions on interspecies mining rights and planetary defense initiatives. He rose slowly, his movement drawing the attention of the other delegates. His voice, low and deliberate, echoed through the chamber, even as some of the aquatic delegates adjusted their audio filters to process his gravelly tone. "The human problem must be addressed," he said, his translucent fins glowing faintly as a sign of irritation. A few representatives shifted in their seats. The air grew heavier with tension, especially near the mist-ringed seat of the Mokwari swarm, who were known for their silent judgment. The humans had been given provisional membership less than a decade ago, after a long series of tests, assessments, and the occasional cultural misunderstanding. The last human ambassador had accidentally insulted 3 major species during a single dinner and started a 3-week-long debate over cutlery. This one was different. Her name was Callan Meyer. She had arrived with no pomp, no entourage, and no excuses. Her suit was simple, her speech clear. At first, no one paid her much attention. Then quietly she began to listen to everyone. She learned how the Sandari preferred indirect phrases, how the Tertians respected pauses over words, and how the Hilari never trusted anyone who raised their voice. She adjusted, not by pretending to be like them, but by being the one thing the assembly rarely saw: honest. In only 6 months she had reshaped conversations. She brokered a deal between the frozen moons of Tral and the fire world of Grish, without once mentioning territory. She had convinced the Galati to reconsider their ban on water-sharing tech, and even taught one of the stern Quillari elders how to play Earth chess. Somehow, through patience and timing, she had made herself impossible to ignore. Draven's complaint was not new. Others had grumbled in private. Too much progress, too much openness, too many questions from a species barely out of its planetary cradle. But now he had brought it to the chamber floor. "What exactly is the problem, Overseer?" asked Delegate Sornil of the Velari, a species with feathered limbs and eyes that flickered between blue and gold. Her voice was soft but firm. "She speaks with respect and listens more than most of us do. What danger does she pose?" "She disturbs the balance," Draven replied. "She connects factions that have stayed neutral for centuries. She asks questions we've spent generations avoiding. If she continues, the Assembly's traditions may begin to unravel." There was a long pause, broken only by the hum of the chamber's air recyclers. Then, a quieter voice, this time from the crystalline seat of the plenary delegation, said, "Or perhaps it's time for those traditions to change." Callan said nothing. She sat still in her place, eyes steady, hands resting calmly on the panel in front of her. She wasn't surprised by Draven's words. She had expected this day. Her presence here had never been welcomed by all, and despite the handshakes and formal greetings, she had always sensed the deeper resistance underneath. But she had also seen something else: curiosity. From those who had grown tired of old rivalries and outdated fears. From young delegates and even a few elders who watched her not with suspicion, but with hope. Draven turned slightly and spoke again, quieter this time but with more force. This assembly has survived wars, famines, and species extinction. We cannot allow charm and inexperience to compromise our future. It was at that moment that something subtle shifted. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, the ambient sounds faded, and a low chime indicated an incoming visitor. A new presence was entering the chamber, one not part of the usual proceedings. A tall, lean figure cloaked in soft gray stepped into the center circle, flanked by silence. The delegates froze. Even Callan's eyes narrowed slightly. This was unexpected. The chamber recognized him instantly. Ruvok's Tyr, a strategist for hire, trusted by no one but respected by all. His appearance in political spaces was rare and never casual. When Ruvok showed up, it usually meant someone had decided to change the rules, and the rules were about to change. Ruvok's Tyr stood at the center of the chamber, unmoving and quiet, as if carved from the same stone that shaped ancient battle memorials. His cloak flowed down like shadowed water, and his eyes, sharp as obsidian glass, scanned the faces of the council members. Most of them avoided his gaze. Those who didn't quickly regretted it. Ruvok's was not just a name whispered in political corners. He was a presence, a choice made only when all others had failed. His arrival meant someone had reached for the most silent weapon diplomacy allowed: influence through fear. Draven Nulo had not expected him to come so quickly. He had only requested Ruvok's presence 2 cycles ago, hoping the threat alone would sway the council. But here he was, summoned by the smell of division, or perhaps by his own curiosity. Ruvok's did not speak immediately. He simply placed a small silver disc on the floor, pressed a symbol, and projected a quiet field of privacy around himself and the main delegates. "I am not here for ceremony," he said, his voice steady without edge. "I am here to observe, and possibly correct." There was no need for further explanation. Ruvok's had been known to end wars without lifting a weapon, simply by turning allies into enemies with a few well-placed words. He had once walked into a summit and left 3 empires in full retreat. No one knew who trained him. No one knew what he believed. But all knew that when he was involved, nothing remained the same. He was given limited access to the assembly. He would observe Callan Meyer for 5 days, report his assessment, and act if he saw a threat. No one questioned the decision out loud, though several delegates exchanged uncertain glances. Callan, for her part, did not flinch. She nodded when Ruvok's passed her, even offered a quiet welcome, as if greeting a guest instead of a shadow. He didn't respond, but something in his gaze shifted. Not interest, not recognition, but a flicker of delay, like a calculation needing more time. Ruvok's began his watch silently. He attended meetings where Callan presented ideas. He sat through. Her debates, stood near enough to hear her conversations in corridors, but never close enough to interrupt. He waited for her to slip, to show signs of manipulation, arrogance, or hidden control. But what he saw confused him. In one tense meeting, 2 long feuding delegations, one from a water-breathing species, the other from a desert-based culture, nearly walked out over a border disagreement. Callan didn't argue, she simply told a story. A story from Earth about 2 villages divided by a river and how they eventually shared it through a system of ropes, buckets, and patience. It was simple, even childish by galactic standards, but both delegations listened. They didn't smile. They didn't clap. But they stayed. In another encounter, a technical team from the Makari Collective mocked her proposal to combine data networks between species. Callan listened to their insults, asked thoughtful questions, and then quietly corrected a mathematical error they'd missed. She didn't gloat. She walked away, leaving them to rethink their approach in silence. Ruvox began to understand. Her strength wasn't in power. It wasn't even in strategy. It was in the way she made others believe they still had control while helping them move forward without realizing it. On the third night, he found her alone in the council garden, reading from an old tablet. She noticed him approaching but didn't move. "You don't hide," he said, more as a statement than a question. "There's no point," she replied, not looking up. "People already decided who I am. Running only makes them chase harder." Ruvox tilted his head. "And what are you?" "A translator," she said simply. "Not of words, but of fears. Everyone here is afraid of something. They speak through pride, tradition, or silence. I just try to understand what they're really saying." He studied her for a long moment, then turned and left, without a word. The next day, he received his final authorization. The assembly expected action. Quiet. Removal. A reshaping of human involvement without noise or scandal. Ruvox had done it before. Quick, clean, forgotten. But as he looked over the files again, something caught his eye. A record from over 20 years ago. A crisis in a border colony, his home. His people were sick, poisoned by a mineral leak. The cure had been rushed there, not by official request, but by an Earthship acting outside orders. A young officer had made that choice. Her name was Meyer. First name, Arlen, Callan's mother. It had not been mentioned in her records, and she had never spoken of it. Ruvox sat in silence, unsure for the first time in years. He had been sent to judge a threat. But he had found a mirror instead, and mirrors, he knew, were dangerous. Because they made you see what you tried to forget. The mood in the assembly shifted with the weight of unseen things. On the surface, everything moved as it always had. Scheduled sessions, formal votes, routine debates. But underneath, tension hummed like a quiet storm waiting to break. Whispers drifted through the marble-lined corridors and under the glass ceilings of the council chambers, the kind of whispers that never made it into the official transcripts. Whispers about the human, whispers about Callan Meyer. Ruvox's tear moved through the halls like a shadow, but even he could sense it, the growing desire among certain delegates to rid themselves of a presence they could not control. He had not sent in his final report. That silence to some was proof enough that he had found reason for action. To others, it was a sign of uncertainty. For Callan, it was simply the pause before something important, though she didn't yet know what that would be. Behind closed doors, High Overseer Draven had begun assembling a faction of old allies and newer followers, feeding them carefully worded arguments. He painted Callan not as a diplomat, but as a disruptor, someone using her species' charm and inexperience to manipulate older, wiser civilizations. He argued that the assembly's strength came from tradition, and that tradition could not survive if humans continued to rise unchecked. Many agreed, not because they feared Callan, but because they feared change. Change meant effort. Change meant losing power. Callan, meanwhile, worked harder than ever. She spent her mornings in smaller council meetings, listening more than she spoke. She asked questions not to challenge, but to understand. Delegates who had once dismissed her as a novelty now found themselves drawn into her conversations. She remembered details: who had lost a sibling in a war, who preferred their water chilled, who used pauses to hide emotion. She treated each delegate as an individual, not a species, and that alone made her different. When she discovered a growing dispute between the resource-rich Thorneye worlds and the energy-dependent Karen colonies, she didn't propose a treaty. She asked both sides to teach her their history. She sat through hours of translation, songs, and ancient holograms. Then, instead of drawing up terms, she wrote a short story, a fictional account of two travelers from both worlds who found peace in helping a third planet no one had cared for. When she shared it, something shifted. It didn't solve the problem, but it softened the space between them. Sometimes that was enough. Still, she felt the pressure. It showed in her slower steps, The way she held her shoulders tighter. The way she stopped speaking first during breaks. Her assistant, a young archivist named Bren, noticed. He asked her once if she was tired. She smiled and said, "Not tired, just careful." But she didn't say what she feared most, that her presence might undo everything she had helped build. Word reached her one afternoon that a private session had been called. Not all delegates were invited, only those with voting power. She knew what that meant. A motion, likely one to strip her of her position, perhaps quietly, perhaps under the cover of restructuring. It was a tactic older civilizations often used to avoid open conflict, change the rules instead of fighting the battle. She didn't wait to be summoned. Instead, she walked into the session uninvited. The room fell quiet. Draven looked up, clearly surprised but too proud to show it. Colin stood at the edge of the circle, calm and composed, her voice steady. "If you're going to vote on my future," she said, "you should hear me first, not for my sake, but for yours." Draven opened his mouth to interrupt, but no one supported him. The others wanted to hear. Even those against her respected that much. Callan didn't defend herself. She didn't deny the influence she had gained. Instead, she opened her tablet and displayed the blueprints of a project that had quietly been in motion for 3 months. It showed a plan to use water from gas giants, refined by Galari tech, to grow food in dry moons previously considered dead. The project involved 6 different species, each contributing a part no other could offer alone. It was a map of cooperation, one that had already begun. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "I just asked the right questions. You..." All answered. For a moment there was no reaction. Then a delegate from the Mokwari swarm, who rarely spoke, said, "I saw this plan weeks ago. I didn't think it would move forward." Callan nodded. "It's moving, quietly, like all good beginnings." But just as a sense of agreement seemed to build, Draven stood and said, "This is how it begins. A quiet shift, a soft push, and, before long, the council forgets its foundation." Ruvok's tear entered before anyone could respond. He said nothing at first. He walked to the center of the room and looked at Callan. Then he turned to the assembly. "I was brought here to judge," he said. "But what I found was not a threat. I found someone who listens better than she speaks and who speaks only when others cannot." He paused. "I have chosen not to act." Draven stepped forward. "You were sent to maintain order." Ruvox tilted his head. "And sometimes order means knowing when not to touch what is working." Callan felt her breath return for the first time in days. She had survived the vote, but more than that, she had earned silence not through fear but through respect. Yet she knew it wasn't over. Some still watched her with wary eyes, others with quiet hope. But either way, the path forward was hers to walk until someone tried to block it again. The chamber lights dimmed as the last vote was recorded, casting long shadows across the polished floor of the assembly. The atmosphere had changed. There was no cheering, no celebration, just a deep, quiet stillness that settled over the room, like fog. Callan Meyer remained seated, her face calm but unreadable. She had won, but she knew better than to think the conflict was over. In politics, especially across species, victory rarely meant peace. It simply meant the next challenge would come from a different direction. Draven Nulo stood at the edge of the council floor, his expression carefully blank. He had not spoken since Ruvox announced his decision, but the silence said enough. His allies had withdrawn their support one by one, unwilling to stand against both the tactician and the momentum Callan had created. Still, his influence would not vanish. It would only grow quieter, more careful. Callan understood that. She had grown up around powerful people who smiled with their teeth and attacked with their silence. Outside the chamber, the corridors hummed with quiet conversation. Delegates spoke in low voices, passing glances and brief nods. Some offered words of respect to Callan as she passed. Others avoided her altogether. She didn't take it personally. Change unsettled everyone, and she had become its face. That evening, as the sun of Veltraxis dipped behind its slow-moving moons, The assembly gathered for an open session. It was rare for all 19 species to attend in full, and even rarer for the public to be invited. The chamber had been prepared for something significant, though no one knew exactly what. Callan had requested to speak, not to argue, not to defend, but to propose something new. A charter. Not a law, not a policy, but a single idea, that empathy and understanding should be written into the foundation of galactic diplomacy. Not just survival or cooperation, but genuine connection. She stood alone at the center without notes, without a projection. She spoke in simple words, drawing from stories of Earth. Stories about bridges built during wars, families helping, strangers during floods, children trading meals across invisible lines. She didn't pretend humans were perfect. She admitted their history of failure. But she said this made them valuable, not because they had always done the right thing, but because they had learned how to stand up again after doing the wrong one. Some listened with care. Others sat stiffly, resisting the emotions her voice stirred. Then, just as she finished, a quiet movement broke the silence. Ruvok's Tyr stepped forward, his cloak trailing behind him. He had not spoken since the last vote. Most believed his part in the story was done. But now he moved with purpose toward the center of the chamber. Without a word, he knelt before her. Gasps echoed through the assembly. Not because of the kneeling itself, but because of what it meant. Ruvox did not kneel. Not to warlords, not to monarchs, not even to the elder minds of the Void Council. It was not submission. It was recognition. A gesture of respect, offered, only once in a lifetime. Callan looked down at him, startled. Her hands shook slightly at her sides. Not from fear, but from the weight of it. Ruvox lifted his head and spoke just loud enough for all to hear. My people once lived in silence, hidden from wars that tore stars apart. We survived, but we lost our voice. One day a stranger chose to help us, even when it risked her life. She didn't ask for payment or favor. She saw a need and answered it. He paused, his gaze steady. That stranger was your mother, and now you walk the same path. You remind us of something we forget too easily, that understanding is not weakness and compassion is not foolish. He rose then, and with him several others stood. Slowly, one by one, delegates across the chamber rose to their feet. Not all, but many. Enough. Draven remained seated, unmoving, his hands clasped tightly, but the moment had already passed him by. Callan did not cry. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. For the first time since Earth had joined the assembly, humanity was not just present. It was seen. It was heard. After the session, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Bren approached her. What now? He asked, eyes wide with the awe of everything he'd just witnessed. Callan smiled gently. Now we do the hard part, she said. We make sure it wasn't just a moment. We make it matter. Outside the assembly walls, the HFY stars of the Orion arm shone in their slow, endless rhythm. The storm of opposition had passed, but a new journey had just begun. One built not on power, but on possibility. Not on force, but on the quiet strength of those who choose to listen. First, and in that silence the galaxy began to change.